All right, today will be the last day that we use with solving quadratic equations. And the last way is there's just a formula you can use. So instead of graphing, instead of solving by using square roots, and instead of factoring, you can just use this formula. The formula itself is fairly easy and straightforward. The one thing you need to be careful with is that it's tough to plug it on the calculator. So I'm going to show you how to plug it in on both calculators. If you're watching this during class, you need to have a calculator. You need to be plugging this in with me to make sure that you're getting the right numbers. So quadratic formula, any quadratic equation, and this is it. The biggest thing that sometimes we don't, I don't think you've ever seen it before, is the plus or minus. Just basically means that it's two different equations. One time you're going to do negative b plus the big square root sign, and then another time you're going to do negative b minus the big square root sign. And so when we do this, this is usually the part that we mess up. We need to divide the entire top by the entire bottom. So you can't plug it in as one big thing. The way that I'm going to show you how to do it is to do the top first, do the bottom second, and then divide the top by the bottom. So the first thing we need to do is get our equation in standard form. So everything's moved over to the left-hand side. This first one, I don't have to move anything. So again, I'm going to identify my A value, which is 1, my B value, which is 9, and my C value, which is 14. Once I'm there, again, I'm going to plug it in. It's negative b plus or minus, and under the big square root sign is b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And so when I plug this in, wherever there's a A, I'm going to plug in a 1. Wherever there's a B, I'm going to plug in a 9. And wherever there's a C, I'm going to plug in a 14. And so when I do this, again, the first time I'm going to add. And so I'm going to go negative 9 plus or minus big square root sign. Again, it was a negative 9 because it's always negative b, just like when we're finding our vertex. So it's negative, then 9. Then I'm going to do 9 squared, and let's put the 9 in parentheses with the squared on the outside. When we get a negative number, that's going to make a difference. And then go minus 4 times my A value, which is 1, times my C value, which is 14. So that's all underneath the square root sign. And on the bottom, I do 2 times my A value, which is 1. Okay? So again, first time I'm going to go through and I'm going to add it together. Second time I'm going to go through and I'm going to subtract it together. And so I'm going to go over my calculator. I'm going to plug it in on both, because if you have one of my yellow ones or you have one of the new color ones, those will be a little bit different than if you're plugging it into an 83 like I have. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and turn, let's see if this works. Turn both of them on. So the first one I'm going to do is going to be on the 84, which is like a newer calculator. So I'm going to go negative 9 plus, again, square root sign is second x squared. That didn't do it the way I wanted it to. Hold on. Okay, so I get negative b, so negative 9 plus, and then I go a square root. And then again, on your on some of the calculators, it'll actually extend the square root sign. So I'm going to go underneath the square root sign, I'm going to go, again, parentheses 9, close my parentheses squared, minus 4 times my A, which is 1, times C, which is 14. Oops. 14. And so, again, the 9 is in parentheses. That's important when we get to the next one. And so that's my top for my addition. So I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to give me negative 4. Then on the bottom, I have 2 times A. So 2 times 1, which is just 2. And so I will do negative 4 divided by 2. And that'll give me an answer of negative 2. So, again, the way that I want to I'm going to do it on this other calculator first. So on the other one, again, I'm going to go negative 9 plus, and then I'm going to do my square root button. And for this one, if you'll notice, the square root sign isn't going over top of what I'm plugging in. So to put the 9 in parentheses, I have to open a parenthesis just for the 9, and then close it and square it, and then minus 4 times my A, which is 1, times 14, and doggone it. And then I got to close the parenthesis that parentheses that I just closed was for the square root sign. Then I can hit enter, I'll still get -4, and then divide it by, it's -4 divided by, and again, it's 2 times a, which is 2, so I get -2. And so on your notes, I actually want you to write out the answer that you get on the top and the answer you get on the bottom. So when we do this, again, in that first one, when we add it together, so we add it on the top, we got a -4 on the top, and then we got a 2 on the bottom, which gave us an answer of -2. And then we want to do the same exact thing. We want to do a subtract. So we want to subtract our top, and then divide it by the bottom, which is still 2. And so when we do that, and kind of the shortcut to this is, in both your calculators, if you hit second and then enter, it'll take you back to the previous entry. And so you can hit second, enter again, and it'll take you back. So again, in both these calculators, I can hit second, enter twice, and it'll bring me back to my quadratic formula. And then all I've got to do is go back, and all I want to change is the plus sign to a minus sign. So if I just go all the way back here to the plus sign, and then right over top of it a minus sign, same thing here, oopsie, change that from a plus sign to a minus sign, I can hit enter on both of these and I can get -14. Again, my top is -14, my bottom is still 2, so 14 divided by 2 gives me an answer of -7 in both of those. And so when I do this, again, my subtract, I get -14 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and that gives me an answer of -7. Okay? Again, just making sure you're plugging it in right, making sure that when we square our b value, we're putting parentheses around it, because that'll actually make a difference. Okay? Moving on to the second one then. The only thing that's different with this second one is I just have to move my 3x over to the other side by subtracting it. So minus the 3x over to the other side, I get 2x squared minus 3x minus 9 is equal to 0. So again, my a value is 2, my b value is a -3, and my c value is a -9. Again, I do negative, and then whatever my b value is, so -3 plus or minus. Again, it's got to be a -3 in parentheses with a squared on the outside, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is -9. Make sure that the -9, you use the negative button instead of the subtraction. And on the bottom, I have 2 times my a value, so 2 times a, which is 2 times 2. And so when I do this one, again, same thing. On the bottom, I know I'm going to get a 4. I'm going to have one that's add and one that's subtract. Again, I think it's pretty easy to multiply the numbers by 2 as long as they are whole numbers. So on the bottom, I know it's both going to be 4. It's just figuring out what goes on the top. So with the first one, again, it's negative. Well, you can really just put that as a +3 plus, and then a big square root sign. In the square root sign, it's got to be parentheses, and then -3 with a squared on the outside. Again, it has to be on the outside. Minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is -9. So again, make sure you use the negative button. Hit enter. That's 12, and then we're dividing it by 4. Again, on the other calculator, 3 plus, big square root sign. I have to do a double parenthesis to put the -3 in its own parenthesis and square it, and then minus 4 times 2 times -9. Close my parenthesis for the radical, for the square root sign. You get 12, divide it by 4, and you get 3. And so again, on add, I get 14 divided by 4, which gives me an answer of 3. For my subtract, again, the trick is I can hit second enter twice to get back to my formula. And so if I hit second enter, it gets me back to the thing, and all I have to do is change it to a subtraction sign rather than a plus sign. Same thing here. Whoops, there we go. Change the plus sign to a minus sign. Hit enter on both of these, and I get -6. And then I divide that by 4 and get 1.5. Okay. -6. So again, for my subtract, -6 over 4, which gives me -1.5. Okay. I am going to skip the 4x squared. Again, that would be one where either way you would want to do it. You can move the 7 and the x over to the left-hand side or whatever. I think it's pretty easy to do that and just get 4x squared minus x minus 7 equals 0. Again, just make sure when you're doing that that it's got to go x squared, then x, then your constant term. Next one, throwing a baseball. I want to figure out when it hits, underline hits the ground. Again, if I want to find out when it hits the ground, that's going to be my solution. It's going to be where my graph hits my x-axis, which is the same thing as my roots, zeros, or solutions. So I can just find the solutions to these. -9.8, b is 31.3, and then c is 1.8. When I do that, again, -31.3 plus or minus big square root sign, 31.3 squared in parentheses by itself minus 4 times a, which is -9.8, times c, which is 1.8. Do all that, and then on the bottom do 2 times a, which is -9.8. And so again, if I do 2 times -9.8, I get -19.6 on the bottom. So for both of those, add and subtract. And so when I do the top here, again, I'm going to jump over. And so I go negative b, which is 31.3 plus square root of parentheses 31.3 squared minus 4 times -9.8 times c, which is 1.8. And so I get 1.107. I'm going to divide that by -19.6. And I get -0.05. And on the other one, go -31.3 plus big square root sign, a double parenthesis, 31.3 with a squared minus 4 times -9.8 times c, which is 1.8. Close the parenthesis, enter, you get the same thing, divide it by -19.6, and you get that. I actually made a mistake over here. Forgot to close my parentheses. It doesn't make a difference, but if it would have been a negative number, it would have actually made a difference. So after the 31.3, before I do the squared, gotta do a close my parenthesis. Again, it doesn't really matter. And so I have one of my answers is -0.5 or 0.05. That doesn't really make sense because I'm finding out when it hits the ground. That'd be negative time. And so what I want to do is do my second. So go all the way back here. Get rid of that parenthesis. That was a mistake. And go all the way back here and turn that plus sign into a minus sign. hit enter, and then divide that by negative 19.6. So I get 3.25, much better answer. 3.25 seconds makes sense. And the other one, I hit second enter twice. Oops. Hey, look at that. I can change that to a minus sign, and then divide it by negative 19.6, and get the same thing, 3.25. So for the baseball problem, I know that's going to take me 3.25 seconds to end up hitting the ground. So that would be my answer. Okay. Flip over to the back, just the last thing here, the discriminant. This is going to be something that you are going to have to memorize. But if you notice, the b squared minus 4ac is just the thing that's underneath the square root sign in my quadratic formula. So if you know the quadratic formula, then you'll know the discriminant. All the discriminant does is tell us how many solutions. Can you just write how many sols? And so if my discriminant is any positive number, I have 2 solutions. If it's 0, I have 1 solution. And if it's negative, I have no solutions. So 0 solutions ends up giving me imaginary numbers. And so when I do these, my a value is 1, my b value is 2, and my c value is negative 2. So all I got to do is just do b squared minus 4ac. So 2 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2. And again, that's just something I can plug in its entirety into my calculator. So I get 12. Again, 12 is a positive number. Positive number means 2 solutions. With the second one, a is 1, b is 2, c is 1. And so I go 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. So 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1 gives me 0. 0 is 0, and the one thing that we always mess up here, that means there's 1 solution. So if I have a discriminant of 0, I just have 1 solution. And here I have a is 1, b is 2, c is 3. And so again, I get 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3. And I get negative 8. Again, negative 8 is a negative number, and so I have 0 solutions, or 2 imaginary solutions, if you want to think about it that way. Okay? Again, I know a lot of this was punching a lot of stuff in the calculators, took a long time, but again, make sure you're getting right numbers on the top and the bottom when you went through this, and there should be no problem. This is a really easy way to find your 2 solutions.